world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analyticaliowan podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
So welcome back to the Analyticaliowan podcast. Now today is Thursday, October 16th, 2025 as you're listening to this. And as the intro said, I am the Analyticaliowan. I am Eric. I'm going to be trying to cut through the noise and the clutter and get you into what's going on in the world of news and politics, because the media doesn't always give you the full breakdown. Some politicians won't tell you what is really going on. They make good sound bites, but if you look at just a little deeper, you'll see what's really going on. Now, just like yesterday, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. This is still going to be an amateur podcast, so there will be some background noise. You may hear my dog in the background. She may jump into frame, and that's going to happen from time to time. Now, we will just deal with it and move on, and that's going to be what it is. Now, the format is going to be something a lot of you might be familiar with if you're familiar with the Rational Boomer podcast. I said yesterday, and I'll say it again, if you have questions, send me an email, analyticaliowan@gmail.com, and I will read the questions here on the podcast. And if I think it needs to be answered quicker, or maybe more people need to hear it, because not everybody who sees me on every place watches the podcast or catches the podcast, I may also turn it into a TikTok or a YouTube video, trying to get that information out to people, however I think would help them the most. Beyond that, as I get more comfortable doing this podcast, and once I get it built into my routine to where I can still meet all of my other obligations and get this podcast out in a timely manner, I'm going to probably open it up to guests, just like Mike does. Why? Because I know I don't know everything. And hearing other people's opinions and perspectives is always beneficial, because other people see things differently. They have different lived experiences, and maybe they have a different take that I hadn't considered. But when I'm comfortable, I will open it up to guests. I will send out a email. You tell me you want to come on, I'll send you an email back with a Zoom link, and we'll go from there. We'll get it figured out, and we'll sit down, record, I'll get it posted. The other thing I'm going to be doing from time to time is going to be TikTok lives, or maybe YouTube lives or something like that, because those get a wide range of people and you cover a bunch of topics, and not always do you get to see everything that is going on with all of it. I can only cover so many news stories. I don't always see everything. So maybe somebody saw something I didn't see, or has some context I didn't get. So it's always good to get those differing perspectives. So you could be seeing those as well. So that's what's going to be going on with this podcast. That's kind of what you can expect out of this podcast. And now let's get into the news. Let's get going. Today is, like I said, Thursday the 16th. It is day 16 of this government shutdown, and there doesn't appear to be an end in sight. So far, the Senate has voted 9 times on the same House resolution that they passed back in early or mid-September to keep the government open, or to reopen the government now at this point, and it keeps failing. Now, the old quote for Einstein is, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, they brought the same bill up with no changes 9 times, and it has failed 9 times. Now, are they going to try something different? I think so. Today, it sounds like John Thune in the Senate is going to bring the defense authorization bill, the yearly defense spending bill, up for a vote inside the Senate. And they are going to see if the Democrats will vote for it. Now, I don't know if the Democrats are going to cover this or not, or if they're going to hold firm and not vote for any spending. This would be one part of the yearly appropriations that is currently stalled because they haven't passed any spending bill yet this year. So they have this defense spending bill. And one of the things I don't know if that's going to be included is going to be continuing pay for the military. Now, that has been a contention point right now with this government shutdown. I don't know for a fact which way military pay has gone. I have seen things saying it both ways right now. That yes, the military got paid, and I've been seeing some places saying no, they didn't. The military was not exempt from the government shutdown. They were set to not get paid as of yesterday, the 15th. But Donald Trump took to Pete Hegseth and said, find a way to get them paid. Now, they found some research and development grant money that had not been distributed yet. And I don't know if there was because nobody applied for it or why the money wasn't distributed. But supposedly they found like $8 billion, I think was the number, that hadn't been distributed. And they're now saying, well, we're going to use that to at least meet payroll this time. Now, I don't know if that's going to be enough money to meet payroll this time and maybe next, because I'm not familiar with the exact dollars for military payroll. But they found money supposedly to get the government paid. Now, I haven't heard that they didn't get paid. Like I said, I've seen stories saying it both ways. Now, Tuesday, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson said to reporters he challenged Democrats to sue Donald Trump to prevent him from paying the military. Why? And why would Democrats sue? Well, first of all, Democrats would sue because Congress holds the power of the purse. And the money that was allocated for research and development grants, not for payroll. So the simple fact is Donald Trump and by extension his Department of Defense, because I refuse to call it by Department of War until Congress officially changes the name, don't have the authority to just move money around like that. They would need congressional approval. Well, Democrats could sue to protect Congress's ability to control the purse and say, hey, that is not a function of what you guys can do. We have that authority. Now, I haven't heard that Democrats have sued to prevent it yet, but it is something they could do. And Speaker of the House Mike Johnson is threatening Democrats, or kind of goading Democrats maybe, to sue Donald Trump, prevent him from paying the military. Now, why would he want Democrats to sue Donald Trump? Because he knows what Donald Trump is doing is illegal. Mike Johnson knows that. Now, he'll come out and he'll say, well, it's not illegal. It's fine. You know, presidents can do this. But if it was a Democratic president, if it was Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, they would be having a field day with the fact that the power of the purse resides with Congress, period. But because it's Donald Trump, they want to give him a pass. And beyond that, they want Democrats, or Mike Johnson wants Democrats to take the lawsuit and sue this administration. So they have the sound bites and they have ads they can run going into the midterms about how, well, Democrats sued to prevent the military from getting paid. And that they want that soundbite. They want that piece that they can use saying, well, this is what Democrats are really for. Because Republicans have told us for a long time, every time it comes up, they're for the troops, they're for the military, they're for the veterans. Whenever it comes time to help people in this country, or give foreign aid, we hear, well, how can we give money to that foreign country? Or how can we help this group of people, but we're not helping the veterans? They wheel the veterans out, they wheel the military out whenever they need to prop themselves up and wrap themselves in the flag and claim to be great patriots. But then when it comes time to really do something, they're not around. Now, if they were concerned about the military getting paid, the House would have been there and been in session and held votes. But that hasn't happened yet. The House of Representatives has been gone on effective recess, going on 3 or 4 weeks now. They're not doing any business. They're not there negotiating. They are not doing anything to help this government shutdown come to any sort of a resolution. Now, under typical government shutdowns, or even leading up to government shutdowns and spending fights, etc., here's what would happen. Democrats have said they want unlimited extensions of the Affordable Care Act subsidies. Well, Republicans say we don't want to do that. Now, what would happen is Democrats say, okay, well, that's what we want. Republicans would say, well, okay, we'll give you 2 years. Democrats would come back and say 20. Republicans would come back and say 5. Democrats would say 15, Republicans would say 7, and they'd meet in the middle maybe at 10 years. Something like that. There would be a give and a take, and then they'd move on to the next issue. Well, the other issue is Medicaid funding. And the big sticking point has been the fact that in the one big beautiful bill, there were funds that were designated for Medicaid that have been cut over the next 10 years to the tune of $1 trillion over 10 years. That is a ton of money. And Democrats know what will happen if those funds stay cut. And that is rural hospitals, rural nursing homes, rural doctors' offices, and things like that, lower population centers are going to struggle. Places that are poorer are going to struggle because they have a higher percentage of people on Medicaid or that receive Medicaid funding. But Republicans are saying, nope, we want to keep those cuts. We don't want to negotiate. Now, in years past, what they would do is Democrats would say, return the $1 trillion. Republicans would say no. Okay, we'll give you 2 years before the cuts take effect. So it'll only be 8 years of cuts. And they would go back and forth again until they meet in the middle, maybe, and hope that they could pass something down the road after 3 or 4 or 5 years, 6 years, whatever they agreed to, and meet in the middle and kick it down the road a second time. But that isn't happening right now. Republicans are saying, give us what we want. They're trying to pressure and bully the Democrats. And it's not working in this government shutdown fight. So neither side is really negotiating. Democrats are more negotiating than Republicans at this point because they've at least said what they wanted and what they've given a starting point of this is what we want. Republicans haven't countered that offer and just keep saying, vote for things as is, vote for things as is. Now, you're going to see people on the right say, well, all the times Republicans voted for a clean CR under Democratic leadership, Democrats should do the same thing. There's two key differences here. And I think I talked about it yesterday, but there are two key differences. One, in other shutdown fights like this, where Republicans voted for a clean CR, the Affordable Care Act subsidies weren't expiring. So that wasn't a thing. And then two, between the last shutdown fight where the Democrats did vote for a clean CR and Republicans and Democrats had agreed, let's fund everything at current levels and, just maintain the status quo, which is typically what happens with a CR that they pass. Not always do they do changes. Sometimes there's more money, but not always. They were going to keep funding levels exactly the same. And there was a promise from Republicans to negotiate the Affordable Care Act tax credits later. Later is now here. Those tax credits expire at the end of the year, or the tax subsidies or the healthcare subsidies expire at the end of the year. And Republicans are saying, well, we'll still discuss it later. We'll discuss it later. As I say, there is not a lot of later left. Democrats are looking at the calendar going, we got about 10 weeks to get this passed before the end of the calendar year. When do you want to discuss it? And all we hear out of Republicans is, well, open the government up, we'll have those talks. Open the government up, we'll have those talks. And that doesn't fix anything. Beyond that, again, with this whole clean CR problem, is that they negotiated a clean CR and said, hey, we are going to keep funding levels where they are until the end of September. And then in July, Republicans passed their one big beautiful bill, this bullshit piece of legislation that cuts tons of money from a lot of programs while at the same time turning around and extending tax cuts to the wealthiest people and corporations in this country, making their tax cuts permanent. And they kick the can down the road a little bit for the lower and middle classes. So you get a few more years of relief. And sure, they want to claim that they added in no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. But those two things are not what they seem either, because with the no tax on overtime, it is up to so much a year in overtime that would be considered tax-free. And it's a deduction at the end of the year. It is not, as they like to say, no tax period, and it will make your paycheck bigger. It doesn't work that way. It is a deduction at the end of the year. And again, it's only up to so many dollars. The same thing with tips. It is not a deduction at time of receipt. It is a deduction at the end of the year. And it's only on cash tips, and it's only on this and only on that. And I think what it is trying to do is, if you were a server and you were always making $30,000 a year in claimed tips, and say you didn't claim 10 grand in cash tips, I don't know, making things up as I go along here for this scenario. And now, because of the no tax on cash tips, you claim an additional 10 grand, but not much else has changed. Still working same number of hours, still working for the same place, all of those things. Now suddenly you're claiming 10 grand more in income, or maybe even more. And now they're going, what's going on here? And that triggers an IRS audit into you. And potentially you could end up paying even more in taxes because you got audited and now have to pay all of those funds out. So this whole thing changed when they passed the One Big Beautiful Bill and they cut a bunch of programs. Their good faith negotiations back in March of let's keep funding the same went out the window. And then not long after they passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, they came through because Donald Trump was pissed at PBS and NPR and public broadcasting because they, put the truth out there and made Donald Trump look bad. He wanted a bunch of their funding cut. So they passed a rescissions package, which cut even more funding that was previously authorized by Congress. Now, a rescissions package is where Congress goes through, they look at what they've already authorized for a length of time, this case from, I think it was August to the end of the year, which was September, end of September, and they said, okay, well, PBS and NPR have this much funding left for that time frame. We're going to take back half of it, or we're going to take back all of it, and they're getting no more money from us, despite what we previously promised. And because Congress passed it and Donald Trump signed it, it becomes law. Because Donald Trump does not have the power as president to affect spending. He will tell you he does, but they don't. They don't have the power of the purse. That sits with Congress. Now, in this shutdown fight, Donald Trump has come out and he has claimed that by Friday, we're going to have a list of Democratic programs that are going to be permanently closed and permanently cut because of the Democrats and because of this shutdown. And that's not true either. Why? Because, like I just said, the power of the purse resides with Congress. So, what is going to happen is he's going to try to shut these programs. Congress is going to come through, eventually pass a budget, give them even more money, and those programs are going to come back to life, presumably. Or he's going to try to shut them. They're going to get sued, and Donald Trump is going to do what happens a lot of the times with Donald Trump, and he's going to lose. He has lost far more court cases this term when it comes to what he can and can't do than he has ever won. He wins on small technicalities. Well, you can get this much of what you're asking for because, okay, you were right there on this small, minute thing, but the rest of it's gone. And then he will blow that small win out of proportion and try to say that he was a genius. And of course, the court sided with him and he'll take his victory lap. Now, one of the other things Donald Trump has talked about doing with these government shutdown problems is he's talked about the mass firings. And, he laid off a ton of people over the past weekend. And then he came back and said, well, wait a minute, we weren't supposed to let all those people from the CDC go. So they're going to get emails and say, well, no, we're going to bring you back on. We're going to rehire you because they screwed up and fired people that they couldn't easily replace. Well, he got sued over that, this administration did. And there is a temporary restraining order from a judge in California now saying that no, those firings can't go through because of the government shutdown and because of contract law and the union contract, things like that. You can't just fire all of these people. And of course, Donald Trump is blaming liberal judges and how they're anti-Trump and they're this and they're that. But none of that is true. Donald Trump is just doing things he doesn't constitutionally have the authority to do. Donald Trump likes to claim and whine and cry whenever he doesn't win something that it's rigged against him. Remember all the way back into 2016 when he was running for president the first time. He was here in the Iowa caucuses and he lost to, I believe it was Ted Cruz. And all we heard until the next round of caucuses and primaries was how that was rigged against Donald Trump and how unfair it was to Donald Trump. Then suddenly you didn't hear how rigged or anything it was as he started winning primaries and picking up steam and gaining delegates. Suddenly it wasn't rigged. And then he goes into the 2016 election. And even before the election, he was talking about, well, the only way I could lose to Hillary Clinton is if they cheat. He was already laying the groundwork for a defense because he didn't want to be seen as a loser. Now, I've said a lot, he fell ass backwards into the presidency. I don't think Donald Trump had any intention of actually getting the presidential nomination in 2016. Now, a lot of people will disagree with me, but I think his plan was to run for president in 2016, bitch and moan and complain when he didn't pick up any steam because he typically was an outsider and he wasn't very well liked. And everybody thought somebody like Jeb Bush was going to be the Republican nominee. So I think his plan was to run, and then he was going to end up, getting part of the way through the primary process, realize he didn't have a chance, drop out, claim it was rigged against him, wait for the election season to be over, and take whatever campaign funds he still had in his war chest and claim them as, as personal money at that point. Whenever that time frame is where you can do that. I think that was his plan. Then suddenly he started picking up steam. And before he knew it, he had enough delegates to be an unstoppable force. And he was on his way to the uh, RNC National Convention as the delegate or as their candidate. Well, then he goes up against Hillary Clinton, who, by all appearances, looked like she was going to cakewalk her way into the presidency. Everybody thought, just like they did with Vice President Kamala Harris, that it was a foregone conclusion that Hillary was going to win in 2016. And I think that's why he laid the groundwork down ahead, saying, well, the only way I lose is if they cheat, because he expected to lose. And he was giving himself cover so he didn't have to take the beating of being the loser. He could whine and cry and complain it was rigged against him for a little bit, and then he could fade off into obscurity and then still keep whatever money was left over in his war chest. But instead he ends up becoming the winner and fell ass backwards into being the president. So that's kind of what I think about Donald Trump, is that he is constantly failing backward, falling upward, um, about how he does things. Now, with this government shutdown, we don't know when it's going to end. There doesn't appear to be an end in sight. Republicans don't appear to be negotiating. They don't appear to be blinking. We could end up facing this government shutdown, end up being longer than the 35 days that Donald Trump had the government shut down during his first term, which was the longest government shutdown on record. So that could happen. Now, how does it end? I don't know. I think Republicans may end up blinking, but that's just a gut feeling. I have nothing else to base it on that other than my gut tells me Democrats are going to hold the line because they have nothing to lose here. Republicans could carve out the filibuster and pass this CR around the Democrats, but I don't think Democrats cave at this point because there's nothing in it for them if they do cave. So we'll see when it ends or how it ends. But when it does end, there's a couple things in the House of Representatives that are going to have to be dealt with. Now, I said this yesterday, I believe, but if they pass something in the House, like if they finally come to a deal and reopen the government, and the Republicans have to cave to Democrats, I fully expect Speaker of the House Mike Johnson to be called up on a vote of no confidence. They may end up replacing Mike Johnson. And potentially, if this shutdown goes on much longer, they may end up having a vote of no confidence before the shutdown is resolved, just because they need to make some movement and some headway. And if they feel he is impeding progress, members of the House may decide it is beneficial to them to remove Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and move on. So he could be in jeopardy there. But one of the things he is holding up by being out and not holding votes, etc., right now with the government shutdown going on, is a little over 3 weeks ago, Representative Grijalva won a special election in Arizona to be their nominee or their representative, and she is replacing her late father. Well, she has yet to be sworn in. Mike Johnson is refusing to hold the swearing in ceremony, and he keeps coming up with reasons. First, they didn't have the proper paperwork because well, she won, but they didn't finalize all the results, even though she won by like 70%, and there wasn't going to be recounts or anything. He's like, well, we got to wait for the paperwork. And then the paperwork shows up, and then he's like, well, we're on recess, but we'll be back next week. Oh, we're out another week. We'll be back next week. And then he says, well, we have to have the full House there to do this swearing in process. It's just nothing but bullshit coming out of him when it comes to not swearing her in. And ultimately, he is going to have to swear her in. Now, some people are suggesting that there could be a lawsuit over this, maybe trying to force him to do it. Although typically, when it comes to something like this, where this would be a rules decision of one chamber of Congress, the courts don't like to step in because of being co-equal branches of government. But considering he is just flat out refusing to swear in a duly elected representative, maybe they would in this case. I don't know. Other people have suggested that anybody could swear her in, that she could get a judge to do it or something like that. Now, precedent typically says that it is either the Speaker of the House or the presiding member of the House of Representatives that day that could do it. And so far, the ones that have presided when Mike Johnson hasn't been there are also refusing to swear her in. So she's sitting out in limbo, and because she hasn't been sworn in, technically she is not a member of Congress yet. She does not have access to her budget. She can't legally start hiring staff, and she can't start getting all of that stuff in order. But she did get her keys to her office today. And boy, was she shocked when she got to her office, because there was a desk, but no computer. Phone lines didn't work. There no internet access in her office. Apparently, there wasn't a router to her office, or it wasn't turned on, or something. But there was no internet access in that office they had given her. And because she doesn't have access to her budget, she didn't have the funds to go out and start getting the things and doing the things to get the computer and the phone lines and all of those things that she needed to be able to be a representative. Like I said, ultimately he is going to have to answer for this, and he is going to be able to swear her in, or he will. One thing he's not thinking about is that at some point in the future, possibly as early as 2027, Democrats are going to have control of the House of Representatives. And when there is a special election to bring in a Republican, whoever is the Speaker of the House for the Democrats at the time, assuming it would be Hakeem Jeffries, but he has his own issues, maybe it would be somebody else on the Democratic side, they could pull the same thing. They could turn around and say, no, we're not going to swear that person in. Yeah, we're not going to swear them in. We're going to hold off. We have this reason or that reason. And they could wait 3 or 4 weeks and watch Republicans lose their minds about their elected official not getting sworn in. But why is he holding out on swearing her in? Well, we have the Epstein files, and there is a discharge petition going on right now in the House of Representatives, where what a discharge petition is when you get 218 signatures, which is a majority in the House of Representatives, to sign off on it, despite what the Speaker says, despite what leadership says. You can bring a resolution for a full vote on the floor of the House of Representatives. And the resolution they want to bring up is on the Jeffrey Epstein files and on releasing the Epstein files. Now, even if this passes the House, it does not mean the files would be released automatically. I believe it would still have to go to the Senate, where its future is uncertain. And of course, it would have to go to Donald Trump, where there is no way I could see him signing it unless the majority that it passes in both chambers of Congress is high enough that it would get around his veto. But he doesn't want to sign it. Now, because Representative Grijalva has said she would be the 218th signature on the discharge petition, she said Mike Johnson is not swearing her in. That way, it puts this vote off even farther. Now, I thought maybe another member of the House, another Republican, could say, well, I'll sign the discharge petition. 4 have already said they would sign it. If a 5th signed it, that would still put them at 218. And just because they signed the discharge petition does not mean they have to vote to release the files. Well, if they did that, then Mike Johnson would have no reason not to swear in the newest member of Congress. She's going on over 3 weeks without being able to take her seat, with no end appearing to be in sight now. Well, the problem with my theory is that Donald Trump has already come out and said that any Republican who signs the discharge petition on the Epstein files is considered hostile to this administration. Now, why would that be? Why would Donald Trump think that somebody signing the discharge petition to release the Epstein files would be hostile to him or his administration? Could it be that he is in the Epstein files? Probably. He knew Jeffrey Epstein. They ran in the same circles. Jeffrey Epstein was a big player in the financial world. Now we come to find out well after Epstein's death that his version of playing around in the finance world was probably blackmail. But that's what Jeffrey Epstein did. And Donald Trump was known to be a known associate. They were friends for years. And Donald Trump doesn't want to admit they even knew each other. Remember, there was that birthday card that Donald Trump signed and sent to Jeffrey Epstein for his 50th birthday that he claims now 20 some years later that it is a hoax and it never happened and somebody was setting him up and all of these things. And that birthday card has what appears to be the silhouette of a young girl. And it says something like, "May every day with you be another glorious secret," or something to that effect. And Donald Trump's notorious big Sharpie signature ends up being right where the girl's pubic hair would be. Now, it's embarrassing for him that this card exists and it's out in the general public. Was it in poor taste? Yes. But all it proves is that they knew each other. But Donald Trump is so terrified of the court of public opinion and the appearance of being connected to Jeffrey Epstein that he's trying to make a big deal about it, about saying that, well, that card never existed. I didn't sign it. Somebody forged my signature. And Republicans are running with this idea. They're trying to say, well, it was a Democratic hoax. It was a forgery. So you're telling me that like 20, 25 years ago, some Democrat forged the signature of Donald Trump, put in this birthday book, and then didn't use it as leverage against him during the first administration, didn't use it as leverage against him when he ran for re-election against Joe Biden, and then didn't use it when he was running as for re-election against Kamala Harris to start his second administration. No, they waited until he actually got elected, and then because it could embarrass him, brought it forward. None of that makes sense. So they came out and, Donald Trump actually probably signed this thing. This is probably legitimate. The only other option would be that 20 years ago, somebody made this card up, told him, hey, it's a birthday card for Epstein. He didn't read it. He just signed it and moved on. Maybe he didn't look at it, giving him the benefit of the doubt. We know Donald Trump doesn't read. That would be the closest thing to a cover story that they have about any of this. Well, none of that makes any sense. So Donald Trump is desperate to keep the Jeffrey Epstein files from being released. And there's this discharge petition that would force at least a vote on that. Now, one thing that could happen with this discharge petition is that they come out and they vote. Republicans might vote by 100 Republicans saying, hey, let's release the files because they know they have to answer to their voters. And they are terrified about getting reelected. That's why certain members of Congress are not running for reelection because they say dumb shit and they have to worry about whether or not they would get reelected. One person who chose not to run because of a couple dumb comments she made, and she knows how bad things are looking and it may affect her ability to run for reelection and win, and doesn't want to go out a loser, is Iowa Senator Joni Ernst. Now, what did she say that was dumb? Well, way back in, I think it was May or June, as they were still debating the One Big Beautiful Bill, one of her constituents asked her about the cuts to Medicaid and said, hey, if you're going to cut Medicaid, I need that money. I need the Medicaid funds. I live on Medicaid. I have health problems. And if you cut it, what am I going to do? I will die. And Joni Ernst just said, well, we're all going to die someday. And that was one comment. And then after they'd already passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, she comes out and says she's talking to a constituent at the Iowa State Fair. And this voter says to her that their child needs Medicaid, is only alive because of Medicaid dollars. And what are they supposed to do when the Medicaid funds go out? And she just says, well, we'll take that under advisement as we look at things in the future. What is that? What do you mean by that? We've already determined that you're cutting $1 trillion from Medicaid, and there are people like this woman's child who are going to be suffering. What do you mean you'll take it under advisement? You already passed the damn bill. And those phrases and things like that where they say these things that are highly insensitive, do not do them any favors. So they decide not to run for reelection. So Republicans are terrified of facing their voters here. So it's an entire possibility that when it comes to the Jeffrey Epstein files, that 100 Republicans decide that it is politically better to not to face the wrath of Donald Trump than face the wrath of the voter. And maybe that's what they do. But none of that is going to happen until the House gets called back into session. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, swears in this representative, and they actually vote on the discharge petition. And we will have to see what they do. We are kind of in a holding pattern here. Now, one thing that may lead to the ultimate end of the government shutdown, and it's one of the things that kind of led to them negotiating in 20, was it 17 or 18 during the last Donald Trump shutdown of 35 days, is after it hit a certain point, air traffic controllers, which is a highly skilled job, despite what they are trying to say about DEI, they don't just hire anybody off the street. You have to have certificates, you have to have training, you have to have knowledge. It is not something you can give somebody a 5-minute crash course in and hope they can do the job, because if you do that, you will have crashes. And that is not something this administration or any administration really would want. Well, during Donald Trump's first administration, when they were fighting the shutdown at that point, after about 35 days, air traffic controllers started calling in sick because they weren't getting paid. They weren't furloughed. They were deemed essential and said, well, you keep coming to work, we'll pay you eventually. And that may lead to what happens this time around. If they start doing the same thing, maybe that puts enough pressure on congressional politicians to pass a shutdown. Now, Donald Trump has said, well, you start doing that, maybe we'll fire you, we won't bring you back. And that works when you're dealing in a business where you can literally hire anybody and give them a 5-minute training course. It does not work in highly skilled fields like air traffic control. They have to have training, they have to have licensing, they have to have all of this stuff. And Donald Trump doesn't care or doesn't realize about any of it. Donald Trump is just trying to look like the tough guy here on these negotiations. And it's not really negotiations. He's just bullying, hoping to get his way so he can declare it as a victory. Now, something else came out. So I don't know if you've heard about this story, but Donald Trump put tariffs on China earlier this year. China said, okay, well, because of the tariffs, we're not going to buy any American soybeans. And they found a different supplier. They turned to Argentina. And that 20 billion of soybeans this year that they would have purchased didn't get bought from us. They bought it from Argentina. But Argentina's going through some shit and they're having some financial problems. They're worried about rapid inflation and their economy falling apart even with that purchase from China. So what does Donald Trump do? He comes out and says, well, we're going to bail them out. We're going to send them $20 billion. And that in itself was a slap in the face to American farmers by saying, well, we're going to pay the country $20 billion so they can, uh, shore up their agricultural field. And then China's going to buy $20 billion worth of soybeans from them. And we're out the $20 billion that would have gone into our economy. But now it gets worse. Turns out Donald Trump is now saying they're going to find a way to make it $40 billion going to Argentina. $40 billion. Double that. Now, where's he going to get the money? I have no idea. Donald Trump, as far as I know, has not gotten Congress to authorize any of that money. I don't believe there is a slush fund sitting there with just $20 billion for humanitarian aid or things like that he can just use without authorization. Because there wouldn't have been nearly the fights during the last administration, during the Biden administration, with a Republican controlled House of Representatives on foreign aid. Joe Biden would have just done some things. But Donald Trump doesn't seem to care about whether or not what he's doing is legal. His thought is, I'm going to do it, and they can try to stop me afterward. And I know certain Trumplefucks are going to come out and say that's what they like about him. But then you want a dictator, you want an authoritarian. You don't want somebody working within the confines of the American system. But now apparently he's giving $40 billion to Argentina, and he is trying to set them up for, just to keep them from the brink of ruin. But apparently he is also saying to them, well, if you don't vote for my guy, the guy that more aligns with Donald Trump than their opposition, well, then maybe those funds won't come. Maybe we won't bail out your economy. Oh, so Donald Trump is meddling in foreign elections now, very openly, very plainly. And if we had a decent Congress, if we had decent Republicans, they would be hauling him in on impeachment charges, but they're not. Speaking of impeachment, that leads me to something else I keep seeing pop up in comment sections. People talking about using Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution to remove Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and the entire cabinet. And here's something they get wrong with Article 2, Section 4. And if you're not familiar, that is the part of the Constitution that specifically deals with impeachment. Now, the way they're trying to read it is that if you impeach and remove the president, everybody in their administration goes too. And that is just not true. What it is it lays out who can be impeached. So if Donald Trump gets impeached, which is just formal charges from the House of Representatives, it would go to the Senate for trial. Assuming the Senate removes Donald Trump, because that is one of the penalties for impeachment, if they find him guilty, they remove him. That does not automatically remove J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance would become the sitting president. He would take the oath of office, he would become president, and he would have all of the powers. He would end up being the 48th president of the United States. Then he would get to pick his own vice president. And that person would have to be approved by 2/3 of both chambers of Congress, and they would serve to the end of J.D. Vance's term, which would still end January 20th, 2029, 12 noon Eastern, when whoever wins the 2028 general election would be sworn into office. It does not automatically remove the entire cabinet. It does not remove the president and vice president. And it most certainly would not make Kamala Harris the president. I've seen some people try to say that. The only way Kamala Harris could become any way the next president of the United States would be one of two things. It would be Somehow she ends up Speaker of the House of Representatives after the Democrats win the midterms, which, again, unless she's elected to the House, I don't see happening. And then they would impeach and remove both Donald Trump and JD Vance at the same time. And then she would, yes, be next in line, something like that. Or she would have to win the 2028 general election. That's it. That is all that can happen there. So, when all of this is said and done, even if they impeach and remove Donald Trump, like I have talked about, which is entirely possible that Republicans could end up deciding to do that any point after the midterms when they realize he is not helping their cases of getting reelected in 2028. They are going to want their best chance to get a Republican elected in 28. And being tied to Donald Trump may not give them that opportunity. Now, for those of you wondering about what else could happen to the members of this administration, could they be facing prosecutions, et cetera, when Donald Trump is gone for their varying acts of criminality? The answer to that is yes. That includes ICE agents right now, the ones that aren't giving badge numbers, they aren't identifying themselves, they're covering their faces, the ones who very clearly do not understand what due process means. When it is all said and done and we have a new administration, there are going to be potentially congressional hearings as well as DOJ investigations, assuming we have a decent attorney general and not somebody weak like Merrick Garland. So they will ultimately end up facing accountability. As far as what statute of limitations could be for some of that criminality, I don't know what it is, depending on each charge. And that is something they would have to deal with at that particular point. Way too early to start speculating as far as how any of that can go. Otherwise, we have to keep going with pushing the narrative on this government shutdown. Democrats need to hold the line. They are doing very good so far about not breaking and giving into Republican demands because Republicans haven't won the messaging battle yet. And as it starts to affect people, they are going to continue to lose the messaging battle. And I do believe that there are going to be states where you are going to see lots of surprises. Like here in Iowa, when it comes to the midterms, we have a governor's election. We have, I'm not even sure how many of the statewide offices or the state representatives, et cetera, are up for reelection. But I think some of those races are going to be at least contended. And there is a good chance that they may flip, in part because of policies set out by Republicans. Now, our Republican governor here in Iowa, Kim Reynolds, has decided she applied for and received a waiver from the USDA about cutting food stamp programs. I think I talked about it in one of my lives not that long ago. They are cutting a bunch of what is going to be allowable as of January 1 for food stamps. And when those funds are cut, it's not going to cut funding necessarily, but when those things are no longer allowed, they are going to have their own issues, and people are going to be looking around for who to blame. And there's no one else to blame right now but Republicans. Republicans are in control of the governor's house, the Iowa House of Representatives, the Iowa Senate, and then you look at they're in charge of the White House, the House, and the Senate on the national level. There's not really any way they can blame Democrats for this. Some people go to use their food stamps and they can't buy sugar, flour, tea, juice, pop, some meats and cheeses, pre-made birthday cakes, boxed cake mixes, baking chips, marshmallows, all of those things. When they are no longer allowed to get them, they are going to be looking for someone to blame. And the tide is going to turn against Republicans. I think the midterms are going to be a wake up call to Republicans that they have finally gone too far, and that they have a good chance that they will have to rebrand desperately heading into 28. And that's why I say there's a chance Republicans could walk away from Donald Trump after the midterms. Once they get their butts kicked, it's going to be too little too late. But I think they're going to realize their brand of what's going on is not working. Now, when it comes to the Israel Hamas ceasefire, it sounds like it might have already been broken. I don't think it is going to hold long term. Donald Trump, of course, took his victory lap and he said, well, peace in the Middle East, except there really isn't peace. And, it was a ceasefire. And if it's already been broken, what good is it? But see, now he can wipe his hands of it. He can declare the victory, says, I'm the greatest. I made it happen. Nobody else could do it. And that's that. That's what he's going to do. Donald Trump only cares about how he's perceived and what happens as far as his own predictions or his own perception to the American people. Donald Trump is the definition of a narcissist. And with that being said, he is starting to crack and crumble around because he can't keep everything going. He's got the Epstein files going. His health isn't the best. There's tons of speculation about how bad his health is doing. Is he really suffering major health concerns? As he went back to Walter Reed for another yearly physical last week after already having one this year. And they're trying to say his heart's really healthy, but we know how this administration lies about everything. So, how bad is his heart health? How bad is he really doing? So he's got to deal with fending off questions about his health. He's got to fend off Epstein. The economy is not doing nearly as well as what he wants you to believe it is, and his lies about how good the economy is doing isn't working. Okay? As he's trying to keep all of that going, he's ruining foreign relations. His tariffs aren't working. We have courts siding against him at every turn. He's not winning a lot of the things that he is setting out to do here. And it's only going to get worse. The more things keep juggling, he is ultimately collapsing. And when he collapses, he's going to take everybody out with him when he goes, if he can. He's going to find scapegoats. We talked about whether or not the military got paid. I don't know for a fact they got paid. But what he did was he set up Pete Hegseth as the fall guy. So if they in fact did not get paid, well, that is something where he can say, well, I told Pete Hegseth to take care of it. And then maybe he fires Pete Hegseth. Then who does he get to replace Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense? Who knows? Maybe somebody can actually tap him on the back and say, you look like a real genius. No one's ever done it before. Maybe you should look at your 4 and 5-star generals and pick one of them. Because he'd believe it. He'd believe nobody had done it before. And he could go back to picking somebody relatively normal. Donald Trump is easily manipulated. All you got to do is pat him on the back, tell him he's a genius, and you can get him to do almost anything. But he's also always looking for a scapegoat, someone he can blame when something goes wrong, because he doesn't want to be accountable for anything. Now, I was also over on Rational Boomers podcast. I was a guest over on the Boomers podcast for what would have been Wednesday's show. But also last night, Wednesday night, Boomer did a live on TikTok. Now, I'm assuming that is today's podcast as I record this. I haven't seen if it is posted yet or not. But if it's not today's podcast, it will be coming up soon. I was in there again as a guest. So that's another place you can get some more of my insights as to what is going on in the world of news and politics. And I have every intention of continuing to guest appear over on the Rational Boomer. That's not going to change. So once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, something like that, I will be over there discussing everything like I do here, but getting some feedback from Mike as well, and just having a good discussion back and forth. So I encourage you to go check out the Rational Boomer podcast. That's really all I've got for you today. I will be back tomorrow with more of a breakdown and more news stories to go over. I encourage you to check me out over on TikTok, on YouTube, Spotify, depending on where you are hearing this podcast. So those are the other places you can find me. Analytical Iowan on all of them. You can also shoot me an email if you have questions. Like I said, I will get to them and I will read them on the podcast here, or I will turn them into videos and get you answers that way. So thank you for taking the time to listen, and I will be back tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.